In that spirit, would you pray with me? Soon we will be done, O God. So may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts always be pleasing and acceptable to you, our rock, our liberation, our Redeemer. Amen. On an early August morning, quite possibly 400 years ago today, as the fog lifted from the Atlantic Ocean horizon, a small white dot appeared as a visual disturbance between that sacred line of blue on blue. As it slowly advanced and grew in shape and weight, the pirate ship known as the White Lion came into view and soon landed at Point Comfort, Virginia, bringing not comfort with cruelty. As a cargo of 20 to 30 enslaved Africans were brought ashore, the roars of cruelty that came from this white lion marked the beginning of our nation's original sin of slavery. On that day in August 1619, just 12 years after the original Ground Zero, when English settlers first occupied Jamestown, Virginia, and began the great indigenous displacement and genocide against Turtle Island, and 1 year before Puritans landed here at Plymouth Rock, the Jamestown colonist occupiers brought these 20 to 30 enslaved people bought them from these English pirate criminals. The pirates had stolen them from a Portuguese slave ship that had first forcibly taken these beloved children of God from what is now known as Angola. Those men and women came ashore 400 years ago and began a devastating reality here on our landscape. They were the first among 12.5 million Africans who would be kidnapped from their homes and brought in chains across the Atlantic Ocean in the largest forced migration in human history until the Second World War, almost 2 million of whom did not survive the Middle Passage. From the comfort of our pews, for some of us, our privilege, most of us cannot even begin to fathom the depths of pain and trauma that was endured. Their backs strained and sore from the crouched and squalid, inhumane conditions of their journey. And so the image of an unnamed woman from today's gospel bent over in pain becomes an icon of painful truth for each of us. There's a powerful ongoing series right now in the New York Times Magazine entitled 1619. Have you heard of this yet? Yes. If not, I commend it to you. It's similar, it reminds me to that excellent journalism brought to us by the Boston Globe Spotlight series on race 2 years ago. It's a powerful piece of truth-telling that we all need to listen to. I thought the most effective way for us to listen and begin that process is for me to be quiet and to introduce to you the voice of New York acclaimed journalist, Nicole Hannah-Jones, as she introduces this series through a podcast.
They say our people were born on the water. When it occurred, no one can say for certain. Perhaps it was in the second week, or the third, but surely by the fourth, when they had not seen their land, or any land, for so many days that they lost count. It was after the fear had turned to despair, and the despair to resignation, and the resignation gave way, finally, to resolve. They knew then that they would not hug their grandmothers again, or share a laugh with a cousin during his nuptials, or sing their babies softly to sleep with the same lullabies that their mothers had once sung to them. The teal eternity of the Atlantic Ocean had severed them so completely that it was as if nothing had ever existed before, that everything they ever knew had simply vanished from the earth. Some could not bear the realization. They heaved themselves over the walls of wooden ships to swim one last time with the ancestors. Others refused to eat, mouths clamped shut until their hearts gave out. But in the suffocating hull of a ship called the White Lion, bound for where they did not know, those who refused to die understood that the men and women chained next to them in the dark were no longer strangers. They had been forged in trauma. They had been made black by those who believed themselves to be white. And where they were headed, black equals slave. So these were their people now.
Friends, we may have heard these disturbing truths before. The teal eternity that severed so eternally. We may have heard these facts in varying degrees in detail over the course of our lives through our education, through our families, through mentors, through books we've encountered. And some of us may have engaged them through the lens of faith, perhaps even through the work of our own congregation's race and identity team over the past few years. But I don't think we've heard them enough in our churches, in the heart of our Sunday Sabbath morning worship. And so this day I'm grateful to link in with this nationwide observance of this 400-year marking America's great hypocrisy. For this is a critical story that needs to be told in the heart of the way we most visually gather. These are hard truths to encounter. They are discomforting. Like Jesus' passage of last week, the fiery division, it would have been much easier to skip over this and simply have a recognition at 3 o'clock today in favor of a lighter Sunday summer Sabbath topic. But these are essential truths, not only for us to inform our national collective historical lens and identity, but very much so our faith lives. For too long, the images of courageous settlers of Jamestown and Plymouth with pure tensions have been lifted over and above the sinful injustices that perpetuated the very beginnings as they upheld and profited from slavery, while justifying it in the name of the faith we hold dear. When we think of the Pilgrims, the Mass Bay Colony, most of us often think of the pursuit of religious liberty and not slavery. But as possibly as early as 1624, and certainly by 1638 here in our Commonwealth, we were fully engaged with slavery. In fact, we were the first colony to make it officially the law of the land. And so too, when we think of 1776, especially here in our historically Patriot Day preserving Boston, we imagine a noble oneth by land, twoeth by sea, breaking away from an empire. We often forget the deep hypocrisy that 10 out of the 12 signers of that Declaration of Independence were active slaveholders, and one of the major reasons why we broke away from Britain was to preserve the incredible economic boom that was the industry of human trafficking. An industry that built this nation out of the cotton-picking prison camps that we call plantations, and led to the majority of the current inherited white wealth behind today's sinful income gap. So this morning, I am grateful for prophetic voices like Hannah Jones and the other Inspired Times 1619 series writers who are trying to re-educate and reconstruct our national memory and the way we see history. Much closer to truth. But they are not only focused on 400 years of injustice, they are refocusing our historical memory toward resiliency, 400 years of incredible contributions given to construct our landscape and our nation. They're helping us see that these 20 to 30 people who came from faraway places came far more than in the light of tragedy. They came with incredible skills. They came as individuals who became ancestors of a new collective people, beloved children of God who came to this land as skilled farmers, herders, blacksmiths, artisans, leaders, and so much more. Deeply gifted people with their own traditional spiritualities formed much closer to the earth than the imperial and deeply unethical Christianity that took them from their place. These individuals, along with their endowed by creator gifts, brought their own culture, language, and beliefs that soon shaped the innovations of food production, crop cultivation, music, and dance that caused our country to grow. Enslaved people like indigenous displaced people helped teach the early white settlers how to farm, how to grow their food from the earth. And as journalist Hannah Jones goes on to powerfully declare in her writing, the levels of democracy and freedom in the United States that have ever been realized have been born on the backs of Black resistance. She powerfully makes that point. So I'm grateful this morning for our thematically linked lectionary text from Luke, read so well by Evelyn this morning, that offers us another story of the back of resistance. In it, we meet this unnamed woman with a bent and beleaguered back. Unnamed, she becomes universal. She becomes the unnamed 20 to 30 survivors who face down death and silence the white lion's pirate roar at Point Comfort. She becomes one of the 400,000 Black ancestors whose children have shaped the backbone of democratic ideals in our nation. For this unnamed woman, like them, is one who knows the burdens of injustice. She knows what it's like to be passed over for 18 years, to be ignored, to be degraded. But so too, she knows courage. She knows hope. She knows resiliency. She knows the experience of rising up tall and proud. And notice, it is Jesus who is present with her in this rising. It is the very face and person of God, as we understand it, who joins her in this great unfurling moment. The encounter of radical accompaniment happens across all odds, across all barriers. For some object vocally, it's not right to heal on the Sabbath. Others judge silently. It is below a rabbi such as Jesus to even engage with a woman. But across these barriers of social construct, there is radical encounter. While most of the world does not see this woman bent and burdened by an evil source, Jesus sees. And imagine, in order for him to see her eyes, he has to bend low. We can picture Jesus getting on his knees before her, divinity kneeling before resiliency. And there, locking eyes. There, the mirror. There, the face of God is reflected, the image of God, Imago Dei in Jesus, Imago Dei in the woman, therefore reflecting each other. Together, they rise. And she sings out in praise, her back unfurled from downward dog to warrior one position. She's able for the first time in 18 years to return to her fullest extension, filled with new life, new poise and strength and dignity, so long denied her over these years. She begins to praise. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Well, not everyone joins in this liberation chant. Immediately following this joy, the voice representing faith, the leaders of the faith community cry out in opposition. The text says this faith leader is indignant that Jesus has the audacity to heal out of order. Notice, too, the opposition of the leader of the faith community here. The scripture says that he is indignant because of this healing. And the reason he gives for this indignation is because healing is done on the Sabbath. Here he whines, there are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured, and not on the Sabbath day. Now, each time I've encountered this text, I have assumed this faith leader's ire is correctly directed toward Jesus, the one who clearly turns the tables and challenges his own understanding of the law. But listen again to his voice. He says, there are 6 days on which work ought to be done. Come on those days and be cured. Not today. He's not speaking to Jesus here. He's speaking directly to the woman. In encountering today's text, perhaps in the context of this 400th anniversary, I noticed something I had not noticed before. This male leader falls in line with the racist, misogynistic history to which our faith, in part, has been handed down. He turns not to Jesus, but to the woman to direct his rage. His response elucidates a long pattern of cowardliness, of white supremacy, focused often on the most vulnerable. But Jesus, notice, lashes out in solidarity with radical union with this woman and calls out his hypocrisy. It allows donkeys to drink, but not women to be set free. The voice of this indignant faith leader is one that we all know well. We've heard it before in our national landscape, perhaps in faith circles, perhaps even from our own mouths. There are 6 days to seek healing, but not today, not now. Come back again. Try again. Women of color especially have heard this voice too many times. Ayanna Pressley has heard it 2 years ago when she tried to stand up to run for Congress against a white liberal male. Now it's not your turn, Ayanna. Wait until next time, 4 years from now. I'm sure Kamala Harris has heard that. I'm sure even Elizabeth Warren. We risk too much by trying to put a woman up for president. Let's wait until next time. The risk is too great. Justice delayed, justice denied. In our personal lives, in our life as a community, how too have we told others to wait? Such responses can cause us to look deep within our own community. Are we paying our staff enough? From our open sanctuary staff to our female clergy, when we have the honor of having them? Are we actively seeking out places to engage with candidates of color for open positions? Are we looking at our own predominantly culturally white expressions of faith and worship and asking how we might become more expansive and inclusive? Not for another day, one of the other 6 days, but for today. These are good and challenging and hard questions for us to engage with, but I am grateful for our intentions. I've seen them in our council just this past week, voting to extend medical benefits to all staff, even those who work under 20 hours a week. This is a step in the right direction. We're not delaying justice. Jesus calls out the hypocrisy of faith leaders in no uncertain terms. His display for us is one of courageousness. It is one of bold and prophetic voice, one we all must garner. We need to speak up boldly and work to become anti-racists, to call out the white supremacy that is well and alive in our country right now, both in the frightening yet blatant ways that white nationalism and fascism are seen, but also in more subtle ways in ourselves, in our own church. White norms and power structures and Western Reformed Christian ideas often can have too much power over us. They should not become idols for us. Blind adherence to Robert rules of orders or church dogma or even beloved traditions should never stand in the ways of us following the wild spirit, the law of love, the way of Jesus. I'll be the first to admit, a lover of tradition. This is hard. And it's often easier for us to cling to the ways we've done things in the past, or notions that following faithfully Jesus in a progressive way will automatically mean that more people of increasing racial and ethnic diversity, gender expression, fluidity, and spiritual gifts will join us on Sunday mornings. If that happens, thanks be to God. But friends, faith and congregational development may not be so directly linear. We might be called to engage in new outreach work that causes us to meet people in new spaces and places beyond the ways we typically gather as a congregation, to be about the gospel and therefore to be transformed. So I encourage us as a congregation in this new chapter in which we find ourselves, with our new associate pastor coming this week, Adam, with ourselves leaning into 2 congregational gatherings over this next month, to push ourselves, to challenge ourselves together, to think about what financial risks might we be called toward, what new missional objectives might we engage with, what new people might transform us. Might we lean more intentionally, as we talked about this past week at council, into the ways of climate justice, particularly that nexus of anti-racism, housing justice, and earth stewardship, emerging in new and profound ways here in Boston. As we do so, as we welcome Adam, as we welcome ourselves, I pray that we avoid the beaten paths of overly weddedness to the interpretation of the law, of the way things have been done, and not miss out on that chance to break out of the ruts into the wild and new freedoms that the Spirit is beckoning us toward. In that, I'm grateful for a lot of good examples and chances to do that. One particularly I want to lift up for us is the Mass Council of Churches sponsoring of an event on September 20th, Friday, May We Forever Stand, commemorating 400 years of Black resiliency at the Greater Framingham Community Church. I'd encourage as many of us to come to that. I'd encourage us to sponsor that event as a congregation, a time in which we're gathering to tell new and different stories, a more comprehensive and accurate story of the long road of liberation to all and for all. So in today's gospel, Jesus bends to see this woman and lays hands on her, and together they rise. The language in Greek here is stark. She is set free from bondage. She lifts every voice and sings out of the gloomy past, till now we stand at last. And I'm sure this is not the first time that this woman ever worshiped God. I'm sure that many times over those 18 years in bondage, a spiritual rose up from the depth of her pain, from a place of pain to a place of praise. But now, in this moment of her rising, as her burden back is unfurled, the entire community, notice, finds its healing. With her straightened stature, the community is able to see her the way Jesus sees her, face to face and eye to eye. They receive a fuller vision of who she is, what her story is, and how she reflects the divine. And in the end of the story, the text say the entire crowd rejoices. As a nation, as a church that chooses to bend low to get a new perspective on our history, as we place ourselves in a new position of humility and solidarity in uncomfortable ways, and as those of us who are white engage in the critical work of anti-racism, recognizing our own personal and societal sins, friends, then we can join in the rising of this unnamed woman. Then we too can move from a place of pain to a place of unfurling, as our backs extend together in praise, as we find greater strength and lasting authenticity to speak of God's love in less hypocritical ways, in more authentic ways. And from that place together we can sing and hear African American spirituals, as we heard in our introduction, in ways that are more authentic, that move from authenticity away from appropriation. And we recognize that these songs emerged from a place of inhumanity and also resilience. And we claim that, and we name it, and we join with our rejoicing. May it rise. And as we do so, may God help us to lift every voice and sing as we become essential parts of the harmony that God desires for the blessed community, where every voice not only matters, but is essential and is beloved. Together, friends, like the converted crowd who saw Jesus and this woman rise, may we together rejoice. God, who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path, we pray. Amen.